Hey everybody, Coach here. Hey, thanks for taking a couple of minutes. I really do appreciate it. Hey, can you imagine an element so powerful in our world that it is a killer and it is a giver of life all at the same time? An element that is demanded by our landscapes, demanded by us as mammals, and if withheld, everything perishes. It is one of the largest questions asked, not only of professionals like myself, but of any horticultural expert. And if we get it right, we do have landscape success. We get it wrong, we oftentimes waste hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. It's what we discuss here this week. I'm glad you're here. I'm sure you figured it out by now, but let's get started, shall we? We watched over the last 6-7 months how this particular element just breathed new life into many, many parts of North America, especially the Western US. And now after that 6-7 months, with so much of this element everywhere, now we're starting to see another side of what it can do when there's too much. I'm sure you figured it out by now, and it's that element H2O, water. The #1 killer of landscapes, both inside the house and outside the house. Experts are often asked how much, when, what's the best time of day? Does it need it 3 times a week? Does it need it once a week? The whole thing is, it's a lesson built on trial and error. It's a lesson built on pre-knowledge, which I'll discuss here in a little bit. And it's also a watch and see. Because every single day, every single week, and every single month is different. And the landscape is always going to demand more or demand less. If you don't listen and you don't watch, that's where the #1 killer comes from. Too much water, and occasionally not enough water. I recently answered a question from a viewer who was asking about watering Leyland cypress. He basically said, "Coach, I get so many different answers from so many different people when I reach out and try to ask about this. So I'm going to you. What is the right amount of water for my Leyland cypress?" Much like taking your car to the mechanic and saying, "Hey, I've got this noise, what do you think it is?" Most mechanics, and Coach here as well, says it depends. It depends on so many things. And when it comes to horticulture, it depends on that daily environment. It depends on what type of local area you're in, what USDA zone, and making sure that that Leyland cypress works in that zone, and what else do you have that could cause more water demand or less water demand. In this particular case, I told him, it depends. It's not a finite science. You may have, like this past spring, you wouldn't have to water at all, most likely, if you were in the Western US. You just wouldn't have to water. And you probably won't have to water for a while in the late spring, early summer. And depending where you are, you might not have to water based on the maturity of the tree itself. It all depends. And it depends on you paying attention, literally week by week, and knowing the plants that you've selected, knowing that you've grouped them in such a manner that they all kind of require the same watering amounts. You don't want to have something that is super water loving mixed in with something that is super water stingy. They just do not work well together. They're not symbiotic at all. And that is part of your due diligence when you're planning out or adding to or whatever you might be doing out in the landscape. As you can see, water is quite the conundrum in horticulture. It is something that if you've got it right, everything thrives, blooms, produces, and results in a lot of landscape and homeownership pride. But man, if you do get it wrong, you just kind of wonder, what am I doing? Why am I not seeing the results I want? And yet, withholding water on certain plant materials, they're going to tell you right away, especially containerized type of stuff or raised beds types of stuff, you're really going to end up with problems. So it's all amount of attentiveness, a little bit of due diligence. So many times we have the thought process as newbies in the horticultural world that is anything that is wilting must need water. Or we look at the surface of our plant area, our planting beds, and we see dry, and we instantly think, we gotta water more. Look how dry it is. And this is where we have to take the next step up the horticultural education ladder and realize that we have to look into it just a little bit more. Not everything that is wilting is dry, and you'll know it right away. You'll pick up that pot or you'll dig into the soil and you'll suddenly see, yeah, the soil is saturated. So why is it wilting? A little bit of physiological things regarding plants. You know, they only do all their water and nutrient uptake on the very finite ends of that root system, the little root hairs that actually take in nutrients and water. And if they are too saturated for that particular kind of plant, those root hairs drowned. And once the root hairs drowned, you have lost the capability of taking any water and nutrients up. It'll sit there for a while, but then you're going to notice maybe leaf drop, leaf yellowing, wilting, etc., because nothing is taking it up. But instead, a lot of us go out there and we flood irrigate the beds, or we really supersaturate the pot even more, which just compounds the problem. So you have to look just a little bit. The dry bed, it may be dry on the top, but take a minute, take a little tool or something and just scratch into the surface a little bit. Make sure that it's wet down underneath. If it's wet a couple inches in, you can imagine what it's like maybe several inches or even a foot and a half or more of how much moisture is still down there, especially if you have heavy soils like clay and etc. Water really gets locked up in there. The roots of those plants can use the water, but it doesn't want any more water. Does that make sense? If you approach your landscape as a one-size-fits-all type of water needs, you're going to end up with problems, and you're going to end up with higher maintenance, big losses of money and investment, period, you know, when you're doing this. So make sure that before you write that check or swipe that card for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, even if it's professionally installed, you have to know what you're taking care of, what their needs are, especially when it comes to water needs. Another thing you have to be aware of is natural selection. You can have a hedgerow of trees, shrubs, perennials, whatever. You've bought a dozen of them and you've planted them out in the yard, and you will have, out of that dozen, you'll have 10 that are perfectly fine. They start growing, they start blooming, they start doing everything that was promised, except for a couple of them. And you look at them and they're wilting, therefore you give them more water. Or you look at them and they're turning yellow, so you kind of go, what is going on with these plants? Why only 2 of them and the other 10 are doing great? This is natural selection. And it leads me to my second cause of landscape mortality. And it's not water, planting depth. Always go out and check to see that those 2 that are suffering haven't settled in the hole more than the others, and all the water and soils and everything are building up around the crown of the plant, and you get crown rot and things die. You'll see a lot of this in annuals, especially. You'll see annuals like pansies and violas. Those things are just notorious. Make sure you plant those things super shallow in their little cubby hole that you put them in the ground, and make sure that they're sticking up, that root ball's sticking up a ½ inch or more. It's gonna look like you didn't know what the hell you were doing. You actually did. I am a firm believer, I really am, and I was taught this by a great mentor many, many years ago. Thank you, J.C. Burns. That plants literally know when they're being handled by someone who knows what they're doing. The last thing a lot of plants want is this really delicate, very careful planting and really tucking them in as if you're tucking a baby into a crib. Nah, plants don't want that. Plants want to be handled in a way where they're put in the ground, the root ball is roughed up a little bit, put in the ground, soil is correct, fertilizers are correct, they're mushed down in there to a certain degree, they're left up just a little bit, a nice water basin is put around, they get a great deep drink during planting, and then stand back and start watching and learning about them. Check on them every day, check on them every week, and after 6 months, check on them at least once a month and see how they're performing. Do not walk away at that particular time. You have a whole new landscape in the yard. It's not a time for a vacation, and especially if you're coming up on the warmer months, you're gonna have to pay attention just a little bit. So starting at the very beginning is my best advice to avoid overwatering. And that is, we have purchased the right plants, we have grouped them correctly in the right part of our yard, and we've planted them correctly by digging the hole at least as deep as the root ball and twice as wide. We've taken the native soil and amended it 50-50 with a good organic amendment. We've used a great starter fertilizer. We've planted the plant and firmed up that area around the root ball so there's no air gaps. We have left it just a little bit high. We've put a nice basin around it, and we have soaked it really, really well. The other thing that I can suggest, something that I did almost every single job, and that is get your plants to the location a day, 2 or 3 before planting. Make sure that they are watered well. You can do a half-strength liquid fertilizer to all the plant material that's going in the ground and let them sit there and acclimate before planting day. I used to do it in the trailer all the time. I would get my plants a day or 2 ahead. They would be in the driveway and I would stand them all up, give them all a great drink, and then on planting day, they were ready to go into the ground of their new home. Now, once they're in that ground, it's all about inspection. Mulching really keeps a lot of moisture in the ground. So with that in mind, once that root ball is wet and you've mulched all around it, it does not mean that you have to water it every day. You'll inspect it every day. You may be a hose dragger for the first 30 days and not use your automated system except for maybe turf lawn. You're gonna check all the time. Do a second knuckle test and dig down in that hole. If you're still finding moisture, chances are you're not gonna need to water. Some of the annuals that you've planted or some really small perennials, yep, they may need a sprinkle here and there, but the bigger plants, 5-gallon, even 1 gallons, 15, 24-inch box specimens, if you soak them really well and you see moisture on the top of that root ball, remember where the root hairs are. They're not up on top. They're down along the sides and on the bottom of that root ball that you put in the ground. That's where the feeding and that's where the watering is going to be done by the plant. If it's a little dry on top, so be it. If it's heavily mulched, it probably won't be dry there either. So guys, you can see that water can be the #1 killer, but that #1 killer is only applied by you, the homeowner, the landscaper, the hobbyist. You have to learn. Get that learning curve in your life so that you know exactly what you're doing and exactly what the needs are, whether it be a vegetable garden, a bunch of containers on the back patio or on the condo deck. It does not matter. You have to learn what the plant is telling you and what the situation is there. Once you get your head wrapped around that, perfect. Everything will go just fine. For those of you who are doing house plants inside, good, deep, infrequent irrigation. I used to love to do them in the bathtub. I would take my pothos and spathiphyllums and philodendrons, and I would just turn the shower on them and just soak them for 5 minutes. Get them really good, a nice steamy, warm bathroom, and I would do that once a week. With that, I would wash off any potential buggies. I would give them a good deep soaking. I would feed them at the same time, probably once a month, and then I would let them drain out, put them back out in the apartment where I was at. So I hope you understand a little bit more about water. Hey guys, as always, to your landscape success, and if you have any questions regarding watering or other landscape conundrums, feel free to email me at any time, youryardcoach@gmail.com. Don't forget the website, Amazon is always there for you. Thank you for a couple of the purchases this past week. Don't forget the podcast if you're on the go. For now, I'll say goodbye. See you next week.